Hi, you're listening to Boggy Talk, Faith Conversations in the Mud, a resource of Church on Bayshore.
Well, hi, and thanks for joining us today on Boggy Talk. How are you all?
I'm doing great. It's mid-May and doing great.
Mid-May.
Yeah.
I'm good.
Did you guys have a good Mother's Day?
Of
Or not
course.
you? Did your wives have a
Yeah,
good
Christy
Mother's
massaged
Day?
my feet.
That's right.
And cooked for me for Mother's
Yeah.
Day.
I always give the kids the preemptive text nudge of, guys, remember that this is your day. No, it's not my responsibility to celebrate your mom. I will, because I know you won't fully do it, but so,
Remind everybody.
yeah, they always do something. Hopefully it'll continue to grow over the years.
Yeah.
But sure, and understand how much their mom does. My word. Yeah.
Yes,
Christy
they
doesn't
do.
like to plan or, so we just kind of wait and see what she wants to do
Yeah.
that day.
How she feels.
What about you?
Yeah.
What is your
It was
Mother's Day?
great.
I mean, Chris Brown is probably like pulling out all the stops because he's
No, not
a
really.
big
Not for Mother's
romantic
Day.
guy.
So when you live close to everybody, and
this is
you
true.
know,
Oh, yeah.
You
the
see
other thing
everybody.
is my dad's birthday is on Mother's Day too,
Oh, wow.
and so that always is interesting because he gets like the short end of
Yeah.
the stick
Yeah.
because it's like sorry. So we used to always get together, but then that was stressful because there were just a ton of people, and we're like trying to feed all these people with my side of the family. So then just the moms started just going out to lunch together. Yeah.
Aw.
Yeah.
So
There's like free lunches places,
Yeah.
right? Like Tijuana Flat, Sunny's.
I don't know about that.
You can
Really?
eat for free, yeah.
wow.
Okay.
Got places.
Yeah, we just
That's what
go.
every mom is like. Take me to Sunny's.
But both of those places serve alcohol, so there's probably people in your family that won't let you go in those
This
restaurants.
is true. Yes,
That's
yes. They will now darken the doors.
That's funny.
But yeah, and then Chris usually hangs out with his parents, and then we try to. But then this year, it was see my dad and
Yeah.
do all the things. So it's
Cool.
crazy day. So
Yeah.
well, we are talking today about family drift, since we're talking about moms and families, and our sermon series right now. We took a break from Joshua and moved into a series called Drift. And so our Boggy Talk series is kind of just following that same theme. And we're talking more about what you've talked about on Sunday, and then just kind of applying it a little bit more. So that's what this series is about. So
Yes,
in light of Mother's Day and the timing of it, we're talking about family drift today. So you didn't really get to talk about that too much from the stage, so we'll talk about it more here. What is that?
Imagine your family on a raft in the middle of the
boy.
ocean, drifting.
Who do you
push
throw
off? Who do you
It's funny
push
you
off
guys
first?
both went there.
Who goes overboard first?
Probably
my
me.
goodness.
Probably me.
That's right.
I weigh
Kids
the
are like,
most,
we voted
you know.
Dad. You're out.
Yeah, yeah.
All right.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
That would be. Oh wow. Can't even imagine.
I mean, Stephen would dive off, as would
right.
Ezra, so,
That's absolutely.
yeah.
He'd just be swimming the whole time.
We have a
Yeah.
good old time.
Yeah. What did you
Sounds
ask?
Awful. That sounds awful.
Being on a raft, yeah.
Yeah.
How do families
drift?
Oh wow. I mean, I would say the first reason is lack of intentionality.
Yeah.
Where you want to go. I mean, that happens. I think usually unintentionally. So lack of intentionality is usually an unintentional choice.
Yeah.
And I do think we talked about this last week, how it just kind of creeps in,
Yeah.
and before you know it, this has happened, and you find your place in a place that you realized you never thought you'd be. So whether it begins with deprioritizing what's most important, making schedule choices, even just even legitimately hard circumstances that can discourage us.
Yeah.
And, I think we could talk a lot about those things. But that's where I would start, is that not being intentional.
Yeah, them currents are strong.
Ooh,
yeah.
Very
so
strong.
I think that if you're not intentional, then you could really easily get pulled in some direction, and whether that be, we're, in more progressive places, I think not recognizing how much progressive culture influences children, and then parents often like to go along with that. In our area, I think it's, the kind of success, academics, athletics, those kind of things. I specifically think that when it's kind of different in different seasons, right?
Yeah.
Like when your children are young, the drift can be towards like just you're exhausted physically.
I mean, really,
so,
that's for real.
So like getting your kids ready and all that on Sunday morning, and all that, you just
You're like, it's not worth it. We'll
Yeah,
just stay home
yeah.
this week. Yeah.
and I think specifically when you're in a season of like the kids are sick for like 3 weeks,
Yeah.
and you miss church for 3 weeks, or whatever it may be, it just kind of gets like, you get disappointed, right? And if you don't have people checking in on you, it could just be easy to kind of just drift. And then I think when they're teens, they typically have things they're passionate about or you want for them, and I think that can cause you to drift. You
Yeah.
know? Away from church, away from Bible study, away from everything.
Yeah.
I think, if you think about what you just mentioned about, when they're little, maybe just think of these milestones and those different milestones in our lives where we are really transitioning from one stage to another, like being single, getting married, having kids. Those are significant milestones that can cause us to drift towards or away. I mean, how many people do we know who like didn't care at all, like about they thought they were Christians or said they were Christians, but they weren't involved, and then they have kids and realize, oh, we really need to be in church. Like God uses those things.
Yeah,
He can use those things, but also that's a hard season, and so it is easy to just use that as it's just so much effort, it's just so much work. And it is. So I think that is paying attention to those maybe natural transitions in life, and then I think as a parent, you mentioned teenagers. I think a lot of parents, and I think we all probably have felt this tension at some point, try when their kids, we're so worried about our kids like not liking us or like not having a voice in their life that we kind of concede on things sometimes that we shouldn't. And I think that when a child maybe is like, well, I just don't want to go to church, and a parent, I've seen this happen, like, oh, it's okay. And then we start that affects the parent and not setting the attention for the child, like say, no, this is a non-negotiable for us. And so we are teaching them to elevate other activities and other things above the Lord. And it usually happens small. And we're just following their lead.
It's such an interesting thing because culture, even in America, probably until the 50s, was the opposite, where like there was such resistance to, there was such like admiration for ancestors and history and legacy,
family.
And then there became this cultural shift where probably for a little while it was more central focused, but probably beginning with baby boomers having children, they became very like focused on my goal is to give these kids a great life, and their affirmation and those kind of things, and it really has become, and you could see this on social media, like, man, people really like they are living for giving their kids what they would say
best.
Is a good life, the best, and that looks different, and I think incomes change, but ultimately that's what it is, and
there was more of a norm of like that Sunday. I mean, you talk about culturally too, like everything shut down. Stores weren't open, like certainly didn't have games and things like that. So it
back
was
in
like
the culture,
and
Sundays,
so it was just like Sunday. That was like what everybody did, whether you were like truly, following the Lord or not. But you were at least in church. Even I don't know if you didn't grow up in church, but it was like unless we had like a raging fever or throwing up, we were in church. Like it did not matter.
100%,
I just remember my dad be like, "No, we're going," and even I'm like a little way more lack than he was about any of that kind of stuff. So it does drift over. I think too, like you guys were talking about the different seasons. I remember friends telling me like, oh, just enjoy when they're little. It's less complicated. You have so much more control. You are their calendar. They're just doing what you do, know? So if you're already like involved and plugged in, it's just naturally that they're going to be there too. But then as they grow older, you have less control. They have their own life or beginning to, and work schedules. Just all those things, and so you're having to then instill those values back in them, and then especially if they're not completely
Yeah.
in line with you,
Yeah,
then
or
it's
if they're not
hard,
drawn
you
on
know?
their own. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
If they're even a little bit resistant or just not, I wouldn't even say resistant, just not quite as passionate yet.
Right.
Because whether that's something in their heart or just who knows? Like there's different reasons. Yeah, it is.
I think you brought up a great point because we are way more in control when they're young. And like a lot of our families who, you know, have kind of revolved their life around their kid's passion, who's now a teenager, whatever it may be. Well, the parents usually started that.
Yeah.
So like they're like, they just love this sport or they just love this thing. Yeah, because you made them do that for 3 years.
When they're
you
in
know,
preschool, they
and
start.
they may not have objected. Yeah, seriously.
yeah.
Today somebody was talking to me about a travel T-ball team, and I'm like,
What?
No, for real. And I'm sure somebody's gonna hear this and be offended, but like, how ridiculous!
so young.
How
Yeah,
ridiculous, you
yeah.
know? But like, you you found joy, and they found your approval in doing that, and so I think it does start like when they're young, recognizing like if God, not just church, you know, if God is going to be important, then I have got to steer the ship, you know, as a dad, as a mom. Because if I don't, you know, just the currents are going to pull and they're, you know, and again, whatever it may be.
Well,
the
you bring
currents
up
are
a
gonna
good
pull.
point, that there are currents, but it's also that our heart is in this and theirs
Yeah.
as well. So you were mentioning like, you know, if we're not focused directly on the right things, I was thinking even maybe not like sports, but other things that people like academics, like your people can be so serious about, you know, you
Yeah.
need to make sure that,
Performance and-
and then it's like, man, do we really put that much pressure or
Right.
preparation or purpose or whatever into their spiritual health?
We even do that with like church, like with
Yeah.
like scripture memory, which I mean, there's no problem with. I mean, for scripture
Please
memory.
memorize
Yeah.
scripture.
You know, I mean, it's inspired by God, profitable
Yeah.
for reproof, correction, instruction, and
right.
righteousness, so the man may be equipped for every good work. But like, it becomes a source of pride in a parent versus like
It's true.
a relational cultivation. You know,
Yeah.
Deuteronomy 6 and those kind of things. And so, I think if there is idolatry in our heart, we will turn our kids into little idols.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That, you know, and I do think that we struggle to believe God. So remember, the heart is evil, unbelieving heart leads to
Right.
far away. We struggle to believe, like, you know, that God will provide, so we don't tithe, or that God will make our kids successful. You know,
Yeah.
so we can't ever let God and church get in the way of, you know, academics, as you
Yeah.
said, like,
Yeah.
yeah,
Our hearts are just really good at corrupting everything because they're corrupt. You know, all these things are not inherently evil or bad, but our heart's desire like attaches to them to get what we should be getting from the Lord. Like
Right.
if we're pursuing and pushing even ourselves, let's take
Yeah.
our kids out of the equation and let's talk about us. If we are pursuing achievement, like, it's not wrong to want to do your best, do all things into the glory of God, and we should steward. But if I'm trying to get validation out of my
Right.
achievement, then I'm going to have the wrong motive, and I'm going to sacrifice things that don't need to be sacrificed to get what the Lord can give me and I should be seeking him for. And so I think it's just our hearts are so good at corrupting everything around us to get what we're searching for.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm getting ahead of the notes, but like, it's just so easy to allow those things to cause us to no longer prioritize biblical community.
Yeah.
And, you know, I understand. It's exam week. Maybe your kid can't go to the youth group that week. We've done that where one of my kids is just so overwhelmed by homework that if they went to church that Wednesday, they were not going to be able to focus.
Right, yeah.
So I get it. But when that becomes the regular,
It's the
that
exception,
should
not the rule.
cause us to say, wait,
Yeah.
this isn't, like, I don't want my kid to go to Harvard and not go to
Right.
church.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
it's a really good point. Well, and you had mentioned that.
But the world celebrates the kid that goes to Harvard.
Yeah.
Oh,
or,
absolutely.
you know, wins that little $2
Yeah.
trophy ring at the travel tournament. Like, the
Yeah.
world celebrates that way more
Yeah.
than being faithful.
Well,
Yeah.
I think it goes. I think I said this before, but it goes back to specifically with parenting. We focus so much more on the what than the who. And if we would think
Yeah.
about who we want our kids to be more than what we want them to be, that will determine where we're headed in terms of our drift. That will give us intention. And we apply that to ourselves. Like,
Right.
in light of who God is and in light of what God wants for my life, like, who do I want to be? Well, I want to be someone that's my eyes are on him. So that then informs what I do and informs how I do it if I'm looking at who he is and who I want to be in light of who he's called me to be.
Yeah.
So put the who before the what.
Yeah.
I cut you off. I'm
Sorry.
No,
I
was-
cut you off.
And it
cutting
was
her off.
Mother's Day on Sunday, and
How
I cut
rude
you
of
off
us.
2 days
No,
later.
I'm glad you said that because it goes well into the next part of it.
Oh,
okay.
So we talked about unbelief because you had mentioned that earlier. So ultimately, we're just not trusting
Right.
God, that what he says, how he's going to bring about his faithfulness in our family's lives when we put his kingdom first and his perspective. So biblical community and family drift. You talked 2 weeks ago in your sermon about the importance of biblical community for ourselves. How does that correlate with families? I mean, what does that mean to help our families not drift?
I think the church as a whole for the family, and whether it's mom, dad, single parent, kids, whatever, is really a support system. It's the structure that's surrounding you that is helping you along in your faith. Like Hebrews 10 says that we're how we're building each other up, how we're pushing each other on, and I think of the church as that, like, my own insufficiencies as a parent to lead my kids in perfect, and perfectly as a dad. They need to see other men doing that. They need older men. They need younger. They need all that. Same. They need women to do that. They need to see that. It's actually really good for my kids to see how other parents to be in their homes and see how they function as a family. One, so maybe they appreciate things that we do a little bit more, but also like, hey, that's great. They actually do that better than my parents, and it's okay. Like, I'm gonna maybe do that when I'm a parent. It's okay. But I think we need this community that's looking out for each other. I mean, I think of it like now in terms of graduation with our oldest, like about to graduate, and I think back over the years here in previous church, like of how many people have poured into him spiritually, who've cheered him on, and
You're gonna cry?
I'm gonna
You're
cry.
gonna cry?
Not right now.
It's
I'm
next
too
week,
tired.
man.
But I just think like is he an easy kid to cheer on? Yeah, because he's
I wasn't
just a
making
nice
fun of
guy.
you, by the
I
way.
know.
In 2
I will
years
cry.
when Cameron
I
graduates,
will.
I will be crying.
Be a
So
mess.
please cry away,
I'm too
Justin.
tired for it right now.
Okay.
But
I cry more when I'm tired.
That's what I was going
I'm
to
like
say.
a camp
I'd be
kid.
like,
I'm like middle school
Just the
girls the
last
last night of camp.
I
Like
just
when I'm
can't
tired.
no.
No, I just think like it's just incredible how many other people have spoken truth over him, to him, called out things, encouraged him, given him opportunities. And it's cool in those moments as a dad to like see other people, because he's also at that age that we all have walked through and will continue to walk through with kids, like where what other people say sometimes weighs more than I. And, I'm like, I'm so thankful they're saying it. I just think I don't know how in the world we could do this without the support of the church.
Yeah, I think absolutely, and I think it comes from parents like helping their children understand what church is. Like, it is a family. It's not like a family; it is family. And I think we've walked away from that in our individualistic society, and I think even like the consumer mentality where like, I think we should be connected to the bigger C church, so it doesn't like we should. Any kid that's at Niceville or Rocky or Freeport, like, they're going to be around other Christians from other churches. So absolutely. But like, you don't just like, I'm going to go to this church on Sunday and this church on Wednesday and this church when they have this thing, because it's not about entertainment. It's about, it's about the family piece. And that's not always flashy and revolved around them. And I think we have to trust God's design for that. Now, the church should be responsive to the fact that there are children here and students here, and we want to teach them. But I do think so many people even approach church from that consumeristic mindset.
What am I getting?
And that's not really biblical community. That's teaching your children the church is about what you can get out of it rather than what God has for you.
And that's a very unhealthy dynamic in a relationship. If you think if you approach a relationship, a friendship with that, or a romantic relationship,
it's narcissistic.
And so that
absolutely.
is terrible. Like that is incredibly unhealthy.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and again, I mean, it's on the parents to teach them. And I think if you don't desire, like, you should be regularly in the Word and ask, do I desire the things of the Word? And if you don't, for yourself or your children, then man, God help me with that. So.
Yeah. So what do we do when we have children that drift from us socially?
Ooh.
So
Well, my children just want to be around me all the time. I don't know what this guy can't relate to this
you can't
question
even
at all.
like this is not the same thing, but you can't even like watch a movie together anymore.
Yeah,
You like look around and
everybody's
everybody's watching
doing
their own thing while you
yeah.
have. I'm like, what happened?
I think this is harder than ever
Yeah.
because of that. And so I think we have to really make space. I mean, this you can't. It's hard to correct this. So you really have to be pretty proactive in setting boundaries and having family time. And hey, we're getting off devices. We're unplugging. We're doing this together, like it or not. And as a parent, you have to also do that, sucking it up, knowing that if you're forcing your family to do this together, you have to know that the end result is worth all the complaints that you're going to have along the way. And this child doesn't want to do it, but this child, it's going to happen. And you just have to say, you know what, ultimately this is worth it. You also do, and especially as your kids get older, you're navigating that space of you do have to give them space to be their own.
Yeah.
Like, and I don't know. There's probably some principles. There's not like rules you can like say do this. There's not a formula.
Yeah, I think we have to recognize with our teenagers that they are physically, biologically ready to be autonomous. But our society
Right.
has caused them to emotionally and mentally not be
Yeah,
ready
absolutely.
for autonomy.
Yeah.
So that is what
It's
it
a real
is.
conflict.
Like, we're not going to
Yeah.
start, we're not going to be like, well, you know what, my kids can't get married at 15. You know, we're not going to do that. But I think also, like, we have to recognize that, you know, and I think you've got to do your best to be relational but firm about the truth, you know, and I think it's messy. I think and each kid's different. I mean, you and your daughter, I feel like, have a pretty close relationship. Why don't you tell us?
Yeah.
It's Mother's Week.
How did you
Tell
make it work,
you
Kelly?
what, I
Yeah.
don't know.
Well, you have 3 daughters. I meant your older daughter. Sorry. Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think that I honestly don't know. I ask her a lot of questions,
Okay.
talk a lot, but she's also open with
Yeah.
me because I have other kids that are not as open. So, you know,
it's
two-sided.
Right.
But, I mean, I think that we just she's probably the most like my husband too. So that helps because our personalities, whereas my kids that are the most like me, we butt heads a lot.
That's funny.
So, you know, and then it's vice versa. So, I mean, I think that one thing that I've thought about too, it's probably easier for girls and moms that have like similar interests. But I was reading even just on like the social practical level with kids and teenagers, like there are a lot of things that I might not want to do with them because it's not it's not fun for me, you know. But like to try to make sure that you're still building those bonds and relationships, like we might have to do stuff that they don't want to if we're finding that connection's, you know, not there. And so I don't know. I'm thankful that we do have a good relationship, but it's a lot of
you got to be a researcher with your kids.
Yeah.
Honestly, you got to find a way to connect with, you know, that because it changes and you have to, and each kid's different. You just got to you got to research, you got to try, you got to investigate and do it.
That's
tone matters a lot too, and correction. Seriously, you know, like that's been a big thing over the last year, having a 15-year-old son and 16-year-old son who have a lot of testosterone raging through their body. Is they start to like, you know, buck up. And finally I've just been like, just very gently like, well, on this issue, son, I won't say who, you know, it doesn't matter what you think on this issue. Like, you know, versus like, hey, you're going to start like, I'm sorry. I respect your opinion, but in our house, this isn't what's going to happen. And I do think like, hey, we are a family and reinforcing that. I mean, I even had to tell a couple of my kids the other day, like, hey, we are a family. If you guys can't start being more of a team, I'm going to intervene.
Yeah, that's
so
good.
that you have to be on a team more.
Yeah.
Like, and they're like, oh gosh, what's he gonna make us do? You know,
the sharing shirt. You ever do that with your kids? Where like,
I
took
made
one of my T-shirts
our
and
kids
made
hold
them wear
hands
like
walking through the neighborhood when they were younger.
That's funny.
Yeah.
And I just think God helps us. And again, having people you can talk to and be like, I told you, like, I felt like not as crazy when you would be like, and then I was like, and I'm like, Justin was raising his voice at his children.
My kids are like, yeah.
I don't feel like such a failure, like.
Oh, I was going to say, I mean, I feel like we're all in the trenches right now.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I've definitely reached out to other people and be like, so
Yeah.
you have older children.
Yeah.
You know, what is this like? And quite honestly,
They laugh at you sometimes, don't they?
Yeah, they're just kind of like, you just get through it. I'm like,
Yeah.
really? That's your advice?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
seriously, it's kind of like a day by day thing and keeping, God at the
Yeah.
center of it. But it's hard.
Yeah,
For sure.
I mean, it goes back to you got to keep the end goal in mind. And I think
Yeah.
as a parent, your end goal. I mean, the end goal as we parent is like one day. I hope that
Yeah.
we are friends with our kids.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you never stop being their parent,
Right.
but that's really not going to be possible if I try to be their buddy and friend
Right.
when they're
I
12 and
agree.
13
Yeah.
because that teaches them how to manipulate me
Right, it
because
does.
I need their approval and
Yeah.
I need things from them. So, I think that's the goal, and so you have to parent with that end in mind. And ultimately, I want them to know more than I want them to be my friend. Like I want them to be a friend of the Lord, right? Like,
Yeah,
they need to know
absolutely.
Jesus, and so that informs direction.
Yeah,
Yeah.
And I think, when they drift from us socially as adults, I'm not there, so it'd be better to walk with people who are there. But by being a pastor, I'm aware of many just kind of drifts and then many serious situations
Yeah.
where they have drifted. And I think praying for them, being humble and recognizing they don't have to, if they're following Jesus and it looks
Right,
a lot
yeah.
different stylistically, that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think probably really beginning in high school. I learned this from a friend named Dan Kendall. He was telling me about his dad
Oh, I know, Dan.
talking to him. Yeah, I was going to say he's married to some people from a woman from Niceville, not two people. He's only married to one person. And he said about when he started high school, his dad would just say, "Is that what you think a Christ follower should do?" And he would let him make the decision. And very strict younger childhood.
Yeah.
Then once they got to that age, it's like, is that how you think a
Yeah.
Christian man should spend his Friday night? Is that and I do think like we
Teaching the responsibility.
do need to ask and realize they may not do what we say.
Yeah.
And not be personally offended by it.
Yeah.
We did what we have to do. And that's harder. The closer you are, the harder
Yeah.
that is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But ultimately, like, that's on them. And you do hope, like, they'll see your love for them.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good. Well, we had a question, so we're going to move on to that. And this kind of comes from the Joshua series that we were doing.
All right, rewind it.
Yeah. So it was, I think, came after the chapter of when God commanding it, to kill
Yeah, there's
all
a few of
the
those.
people,
Yeah.
basically.
kind of a thing in Joshua.
All the kings.
Yeah.
I should remember
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
count by now. How
Yeah.
many times I had to read that? But
Yeah.
so whenever we have this absolute
Like,
evil,
their
it's like
feet on their necks. And
Yeah,
hung
like-
them on a tree. Yeah.
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 They took them
So-
down by night.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
By sunset. Didn't want to get in the way of the sunset.
Yeah,
Yes.
They weren't in the back of the Instagram pictures because they took them down.
definitely no photobombing there.
Probably not funny.
But they, okay, so this person's saying, like, I get it. I get that these people were absolutely evil and they were depraved, and so that
Yeah.
was why God is commanding them to do this. But what did it do to the Israelites personally, like to maybe their psyche, or because
Yeah.
we have people whose
Right.
jobs in the military, like, they're trying to protect us from
Yeah.
evil, and they're overseas or wherever, and they're having to take people out.
Yeah.
So, how do we feel about that when there's loss of life,
Yeah.
but it's justified? Maybe
Yeah.
how does that impact the
This
person?
is a really good question. And honestly, I hadn't thought of something. I hadn't thought of it. Like, how did it actually affect the Israelites? But I think one, we can only guess, really, because that's not what the scriptures are trying to teach us. So,
Yeah.
so this is when I say that, I'm not saying you shouldn't think about it. This is a fine question. So, but we can't look necessarily to scriptures to give us like, well, this is what it did to them, because we don't fully know. So it is kind of like, where were they in history? What were the influences? What would have been their mentality? And we can't impose necessarily our 21st century understanding
Yeah,
of
it's
all
true.
this on that. So those things being said, you have to imagine it did something, and whether it was teaching them like the severity of God's judgment, and really instilling in them a fear. I can't speak with absolute certainty, and you've dived into these passages more so as you've been teaching, and maybe you have something to add. I can't say that we don't really know how they viewed everyone else, these other tribes, other than they probably did not view them in the same terms of humanity that we do now in our culture. I could absolutely be wrong about that. I can't say what it did, but I know it had to do something.
Yeah, you reinforced your point the more you talk, because the more you talk, it started to be like, ooh, okay, where's he going with that?
Yes, you do that sometimes. Where am I going? I will land. I promise.
Right.
I got to explain the thought
but
pattern.
I think when we start to speculate, we start to speculate,
exactly,
and potentially get into places that we shouldn't go. And so I think, if God wanted us to focus in on that aspect, it would have been revealed to us in Scripture.
Yeah.
I think it's very nuanced, and I think that you could speak to kind of the whole idea of war in general, and PhD dissertations and books have been written on that. So we're certainly not going to do that justice right now. I think that just a couple talking points that are related but unrelated as well to each other. One is I do think people struggle more when whether or not it is a just war is debatable. So you can research people who came out of World War II versus people who came out of the Civil War and Vietnam, or even the Gulf War versus the Afghanistan, the Iraq thing, because when in the Gulf War, we're responding to them bombing, and the weapon, like Saddam Hussein, really his what he's doing. But then the Afghanistan, initially we kind of got, I don't want to say sidetracked, but it became very complicated and we didn't know what we were really doing. Vietnam wasn't really effective. My whole point is I do think that people struggle with this a little less when they say this is a just cause. This is a just war. So I'll say that piece. And ultimately I would say I've preached on this before, I would say to guys who are soldiers, God isn't actually holding you accountable to that. He's holding the leaders accountable to that. Yeah. And that is a big weight.
Yeah.
He is holding you accountable. I've specifically Green Berets who have told me about people they've been with who've killed people they shouldn't have. God has, if he sees you just wanting to kill somebody because they have dark skin, over there, that is, he is holding you accountable for that. But if you're just carrying out the orders, he's not holding you accountable for that.
Yeah.
But my whole point then is I do think there's still even if it is just, there is the psychological effect.
Yeah.
And I just, the Bible really does not speak to that. It speaks to how to care for each other.
Right. Yeah.
So when it comes to Israel, I do think it was very clear. I'm going to remind you that 400 years had passed since God said the Amorites were evil and I'm going to let their iniquity build. It was almost like God was saying, I'm going to make it so clear that these people are bad news. So that my justice is completely deserved and you see it. And then we'll be like, well, God executed wrath. Well, the worst thing actually is that God the bigger problem is that God let them be evil for 400 years. Yeah. What happened to children who were sacrificed? What happened to women and how they were treated for 400 years? That's the greater philosophical problem.
Right.
So I think my ultimate answer to the question would be that God probably did what he needed to do for Israel to be as okay with trusting him in that action. So.
Well, that's a great
But that
answer.
doesn't fully answer the question.
Yeah. Again, we don't know.
Yeah.
Because even when I started getting the Vietnam versus whatever, people could be like, well, but,
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot
No,
of
revisionist history is but really the Nazis were okay, It's no, they weren't.
No.
Yeah.
Hitler was just misunderstood.
Yeah.
Just
Man. Wow.
Boy.
Seriously.
Somebody's
It
gonna
is
quote
pretty
you on
scary.
that.
It is crazy.
My pastor said
Hitler
it was just misunderstood.
There's people out there that say that
There
stuff.
absolutely. Yeah.
It's
And
crazy.
when I hear that, I'm certainly they're just trying to get a reaction. This is a joke. And I'm no, they actually are
they're
believing
actually-
this. I can't.
There's some crazy people out there.
There are.
Well,
There is.
what did I say?
I don't know.
There
I'm
are
me.
crazy.
There
yeah,
are crazy people out there.
Yeah. Okay. Grammar's hard sometimes. So next question. What is the difference between a child dedication and baptism?
Water.
So we had it. Yeah.
That's
That is a difference. That is a difference.
Water.
Water.
That is my answer. Yeah.
That was-
It really depends. I mean, I could speak to it here at our church because I have. Yeah, it just depends on how you practice it too. Because there are. So we do child dedications. We actually do family dedications, which is setting the family apart. Mom and dad saying we're setting our child apart, and this is a church saying we are supporting you. This isn't just a you parent thing. This is all of us together. We don't practice baptism. We are not, pedo-Baptists. We are not baptizing infants. We are credo Baptists, baptizing upon profession of faith. And so really that's the difference. Like we're not baptizing them into the church.
Yeah.
So that's the difference. I
Right.
think there are those who practice infant baptism as a means of like, hey, you're now like if this baby died, you're saved. That would be a Catholic practice. There's other practices of infant baptism where it is more symbolic, and they would later have a baptism after, usually not a profession of faith, but after what's the word? Confirmation, So there would be two baptisms, and the first one would be more of a dedication, but it is still dedicating you baptizing you into the church, which we as Baptists don't baptize people into the church until they have made a profession of faith.
Yeah, it's a way of dealing with original sin.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think you said church membership. With membership, you're acknowledging this person is a part of the body of Christ and they're going to heaven. And, we probably all believe that a baby has not transgressed the law, but we don't think baptizing them is in the Bible, first of all,
Right.
and secondly, does anything about original sin, So we don't see baptism as a salvific act. We see it as a symbolic act of salvation. And so, but I do think you're right. I do think, so from a practicing standpoint, there's a differentiation. I do think in a lot of people's minds, there is no differentiation.
Yeah, that's true.
Like,
Really?
I think there are people who are like, this is what you do with your child.
We just don't use water.
Yeah.
Like like a christening of more than an infant baptism. It's more of the christening where like we are dedicating our child to the Lord, and
We don't want them to go to hell.
Yeah.
Seriously.
No.
Yeah.
There's that mentality for sure. So.
All right. So as we're talking about drift, you brought up last week that apologetics can be important, or is it important in drift?
So we're pre-recording this. So what I did was I talked about how people hide behind philosophy, in science, spirituality.
Yeah.
So I just kind of briefly talked about that. I even was like, hey, I'm just quickly explaining this and explaining why it's not like it was not doing any of these issues justice. But I do think I think that it can be helpful. I think to understand some philosophical arguments about Christianity and against Christianity, to understand a little bit of science, I think those things can be helpful. I think we don't need to feel so burdened by them unless we're regularly come back to our children, like unless that's what people are talking about. And then I do think to become all things to all men, it's like, okay, I want to research these issues more, and I want to be able to have a conversation and really dialogue about these things. So I think they can be a helpful tool. I think that not so much now, but probably like Josh McDowell days, right?
Yeah, that was a big deal.
He was walking around with a big Tommy Hilfiger shirt and selling books. Like back in those days, like I think that people became overly focused on them. And when Paul says the gospel is the power of God for salvation of those who believe.
Yeah.
And so like they would even have those debates and then never actually like explain what is the answer
Right,
to,
yeah.
to these
It's about the
issues.
debate
Yeah.
itself
Agreed.
more than...
So yeah, I mean, it's,
it's important. It's good to know why you believe and how to like defend it. But I do think there is an element of apologetics where people get maybe even too aggressive, or
Well, that's for sure.
yeah, where they're just like adamant.
So you're saying you're a liar. You're saying you're a liar. Who's the guy?
Like,
Ray Comfort. Ray Comfort.
like,
Yeah.
Yeah,
Hey,
I
Comfort.
Think,
I haven't thought about him.
And like you said, I mean, I remember in seminary we had to attend and they set it up like it was debates,
Yeah,
which is
right.
interesting. But even in the apologetics piece of it, they never really got to like what is the hope. And there was one about creation and Darwinism, and it was interesting to hear the counterpoint, back and forth exchange. It's actually really good learning experience. But there never was a why do you do this explanation at the end. So yeah.
Okay. Well,
What do you think, Kelly?
Yeah, I mean, I went to a school that we had an apologetics class, and that was the whole, like, you had a topic and you had to debate it, but, I mean, we were all teenagers then. There are some people that could debate very well, so they were, blue in the face, and they said all the things, but did their life reflect any of that? No, so that's my whole thing.
I remember,
just
like I was 21. I had just kind of been like, hey, I'm going to be in ministry. I was still in Jacksonville, kind of making the transition, and we went to a debate. It was Kent Hovind and and some teacher at UNF. I didn't have him, but he was a professor at UNF. And so this
he
guy
was the creation guy, right?
Yeah, this guy just comes in for like the night, but this other guy like lives amongst these students and professors. And I would say Kent won the debate if you were giving that, but he was such a jerk.
Yeah.
And I don't know anything about it. He might be a great guy. He might not be like that anymore. I really don't know much about him.
Yeah.
But I remember thinking, like, I should not be walking away from this thinking, man, the atheist professor sure was nicer than the other guy.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that you
point.
can't like have healthy, but like just he was demeaning.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's just proof that you can have all the knowledge, but it not change your heart, and so you need both.
Agreed. Apologetics, good. Jerkiness, bad. There you go.
That's a great note to end on.
There you go.
Well, there's your answer, guys. So I'm glad we had that clear.
Bringing it home.
Great answers, right?
Yes, thank you, guys.
That's right.
Awesome.
His first answer, we don't know what they felt. Water's the difference. And apologetics good,
Try to
jerkiness
keep
bad.
things simple.
Glad I know this. Check. All right, we got it down. Well, if you have any other questions that you need a great, simple answer to, then you can email me at kelly@churchonbayshore.org. And thanks for tuning in. We'll see you guys next time.
Thanks for listening to Boggy Talk. We are so glad you joined in the conversation. Go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss a beat.